welcome to another chapter of Read Aloud. I am super excited for this chapter because this is where all the action starts, so buckle up. Alright, and your thinking question for this chapter is, Aurella and Mavic get into some very dangerous situations in this chapter, and I'm not going to tell you if in the end they get out of them, but there's a couple of times where they kind of squeeze by, and I want you to think, do you think it was luck or quick thinking that got them out of those sticky situations? All right, let's get started. Chapter 8, and now it's Mavic's turn. Aurella and Mavic snuck down a pathway between the orphanage and a field of cows. Aurella waved at the cows, even though she knew they wouldn't wave back. It made her sadder than she expected when they didn't respond. This date was full of goodbyes, but the only ones she'd actually said goodbye to were those stupid cows that wouldn't even acknowledge her presence. "Are you sure we can't just stop by my house for like a second?" Aurella tried for the third time that day. "No, Ella, I'm sorry, it's not safe right now," Mavic sighed in his adorable little boy voice. Aurella sniffed and blinked back her tears. Mavic's eyebrows came together in concern. "Hey now, don't you go crying on me. I don't want to have to tell people that my sidekick succumbs to human weaknesses." "Sidekick? I'm the one that's wanted here. If anything, you're my sidekick." She punched him in the arm. Mavic smiled. "There's my Ella." He took her hand and walked slightly in front of her as they made it to the main road. It was startlingly empty. They looked questioningly at one another before Mavic tugged her north toward the shops and food stands. "I'm not asking you where we're going because I'm assuming you know what you're doing," she whispered. "Good," he peeped. "So, where are we going?" He rolled his eyes. "Just hang tight. I know a place where we might be able to hide out until we come up with a plan." "So we don't have a plan yet?" "I have a fragment of a plan." He looked over his shoulder. "Where is everyone?" Aurella looked around. They were nearing the heart of Lennox and the bakery she'd sat in front of 2 days ago. The streets should have been buzzing. It was mid-morning already, but every single shop along the road was closed. There wasn't a single person in sight, and it was eerily quiet. Nothing like the usual combination of loud bargaining, horse hooves, and grumpy people. Something had to be horribly wrong for the village to be virtually shut down. "Oh no!" Aurella gasped. "Mavic, you don't think this is all because of me, do you? Do you think people are hiding in their homes? From me?" Mavic grimaced, then whispered, "I think I made a mistake. I don't think we should be out here." Aurella felt as though her stomach fell to her feet, and she tried with all her might to breathe around the lump in her throat. Just up the road, they heard 2 clankers arguing loudly over the sound of their armor. Aurella and Mavic froze. "No, that was a cat, Ronan. Stop! Ronan, how old are you? Don't throw a rock at it." "It might have been the girl." "She can't turn into a cat, Ronan, you idiot." "How do you know? It's a ginger cat and she's a ginger girl." "Come here, kitty." "See, Ron, it's just a cute little kitty." "Aww." Their figures came into view as they turned a corner and walked toward them. Aurella tensed. Mavic's grip on her hand tightened. The clankers came closer, and the one not holding the cat noticed them first. He nudged his fellow clanker, who dropped the cat. Together they marched purposefully toward Aurella and Mavic. Aurella's heart pounded angrily in her chest. Her panicked breaths became shorter and shorter, and her hands became slippery with sweat. In that moment, she wanted nothing more than a giant bear hug from both her parents at the same time. She called it their boa constrictor hug because it felt like being squeezed to death, but it was the most wonderful feeling in the world. "Mavic, I want to go home," she whispered. "Ella, look at me." He put his hands on her shoulders and looked into her eyes. "I don't like this either, but we need to keep our heads. You can't lose it right now, all right? We need to focus." Aurella nodded. The clankers caught up to them and stood in their path.
"Have you seen Aurella of Lennox?" one demanded in a deep, scruffy voice.
Aurella blinked nervously. "Who? Can I play with your kitty?" piped Mavic.
"It's not my kitty. I mean, cat."
The clanker cleared his throat.
"We're looking for a girl named Aurella. She's about your height and age. Reddish hair, probably in your class at school."
We don't go to school," Aurella stuttered. "We live at the orphanage."
"Then what are you doing out here on the streets?" the other demanded. "Don't you know the danger?"
Aurella opened her mouth to answer, but for some reason, her brain decided to stop working at that point. She stood there with her mouth open as the clankers glared down at her. Aurella looked over at Mavic, pleading with her eyes. "Say something, idiot!" "She was taking me to the doctor," Mavic piped up. "My tum-tum hurts."
"Excuse me?"
"Yeah," Aurella nodded. "I think he ate something bad."
"So what are you doing here wasting our time? Get going!" the first one grumbled.
Aurella and Mavic scurried away. After what felt like a safe distance, Aurella snorted. "What?" Mavic asked. "Your tum-tum hurts?" The situation was far from funny, but her nerves released a torrent of uncontrollable giggles. "Ella, be quiet! Are you trying to attract attention?" Aurella sobered and looked down at her toes. "That was too close. What if there were more of them? We need to hide. Maybe it would have been safer if we left at night." Mavic tried the door of a leather shop they'd just passed. It was locked. He banged on the door, but no one answered. Aurella tried the bakery, but it was locked as well. She peeked in through the window. The oven was empty, and half-prepared lumps of dough sat on the counter, attracting flies. She and Mavic shared a worried glance. They began running down the street, picking up more speed with each step, checking for open windows or doors. Everything was locked and bolted shut. They met in the middle of the street, panting in panic. It seemed as though nothing could get worse. That is, until they heard the clinking and clanking of metal that only meant one thing. Mavic swore. He tried to punch through a window, but his perception was thrown off by his disguise. Aurella was momentarily distracted when she saw a small dent left in the wood on a wall, 3 feet higher than Mavic was aiming. The noise became louder as 2 clankers rounded a corner, stomping toward them. "We were just making sure we locked the door," lied Mavic. "Back into hiding from the witch girl. Great job spreading terror through the streets." He grabbed Aurella's hand and took off back the way they came.
"Where are you two running off to?"
one shouted. "Just ignore them," Mavic whispered.
"Hold up!"
growled the other, grabbing Mavic's arm. But it wasn't Mavic's actual arm, because the real Mavic was twice as big. The clanker flinched away, disoriented from grabbing what felt like a thigh.
"It's witch magic!"
he shouted. He gave his partner a signal and ran off. His partner immediately tackled Mavic, who swung and punched him in the face. They wrestled on the ground until the first clanker came back with 3 more clankers. "Ella, run!" Mavic shouted. "No!" she yelled back. One of the clankers grabbed Aurella by the hair. She tried to pull her hair free from his vice-like grip. He clenched tighter, and Aurella frantically scratched at his hands. "Let us go!" she screamed. The clankers froze, then did exactly as she demanded, giving Mavic and Aurella a brief opportunity to dash away. Unfortunately, the spell only worked for a split second, because as soon as they let go, they were pursuing them once again. Soon, even more clankers were coming up the road. "Fall down! Punch yourself! Run away!" Aurella shouted. But there were too many to eliminate individually, and her head was beginning to throb. "What do we do?" she asked, panicked. "Just keep running!" But clankers were swarming the streets behind them, their numbers increasing by the second. Aurella wondered how they all found them so quickly, but then she remembered what Mavic had said about how people can sense manipulators. That must make them incredibly easy to track. Even more clankers appeared on horseback, and Mavic swore loudly. "We can't outrun horses!" Aurella screamed. She looked over, and his expression was one she could never forget. Determination, fear, anger, guilt. Their impending capture was on them, and while she knew that Mavic would never go down without a fight, she also knew that there was nothing he could do about it. This wasn't something he could punch his way out of. So she stopped running and turned around to face the mob. "Ella, what are you doing?" Mavic desperately tugged on her arm. Aurella closed her eyes and shouted, "All clankers in sight will run away and tell everyone that Aurella of Lennox was seen going south." For a second, the spell worked. Every clanker on the street froze, then sprinted in the opposite direction. Then the throbbing in Aurella's head sharpened to a debilitating agony, and she yelled out in pain. She clutched her head and fell to the ground. Her spell wavered, and some of the clankers began running back toward her and Mavic. "Stop the spell!" Mavic pleaded. "It's too much!" He scooped her into his arms and ran up a forest-lined road. Eventually, Aurella could not hold the spell any longer. All the officers previously manipulated to running away turned around and sprinted toward them. Even her and Mavic's disguises disappeared. She clutched Mavic's neck, knowing that this was probably the end. There were too many clankers to count and no way out. Aurella closed her eyes and started counting all the blessings she'd been given before her life was over. Her parents, Mavic, the forest, books, fresh-baked bread. "I need my hands," Mavic said suddenly. He set Aurella on the ground and turned to face the clankers. "Mavic, no!" Aurella shouted, still pressing down on her temples. He frantically signed something in the language of the warlocks. His arms waved frantically as his hands twisted and his fingers whirled. Aurella could not make any sense of it. Seconds after finishing his spell, an officer tackled him to the ground, just as a loud, ominous creaking echoed all along the road. Everyone froze and looked at the trees. 5 ancient elms began falling, and before the clankers had time to run away, the trees toppled over, smashing the officers underneath. Mavic jumped out of the way just in time. He grabbed up Aurella and sprinted away. He stumbled once, recovered, and shot up the road like a speeding arrow. He ran so fast that Aurella had to cover her ears to warm them from the icy wind. She looked over Mavic's shoulder as clankers began crawling out from under the branches. She closed her eyes and hid her face on his shoulder. On Mavic ran, putting as much distance between them and the clankers as possible. After running past a hill and a stream, strange little cottages appeared along the road. Just 1 or 2 at first, then an entire neighborhood. None of the houses appeared inhabited, and Aurella wondered how she'd lived her whole life in Lennox and never knew about this place. Aurella looked over Mavic's shoulder again. "We lost them!" Mavic nodded and slowed to a jog. Aurella could feel his labored breathing on top of her head. A small bead of sweat dripped down his chin and onto Aurella's shoulder. She would have joked or complained about his gross breathing and sweat, but she could tell he was seriously spent. He'd carried her the entire way, and not once did he stop, even when Aurella insisted that he set her down. Mavic trudged up the steps of a random abandoned house. Aurella turned the doorknob for him, and they stumbled inside. Before Aurella had time to ask Mavic where they were, he set her down and collapsed on the floor. "Mavic, what's wrong?"
"Never done so much manipulation in my life," he wheezed. "And you're not as light as you look."
"What can I do to help?"
"Nothing. Just gonna take a nap."
He threw an arm over his face and passed out instantly. Aurella stared down at him for a while, too shocked by the day's events to even move. She watched as his breathing slowed and morphed into snores. Eventually, she blinked and shook her head. She shut the door to the house, hobbled over to a dusty couch, and followed Mavik's example. All right, that's the end of that chapter, and the next chapter is called The Obscure Hideout. All right, thanks for joining in on this chapter. Remember, the thinking question is, when they got past the clankers and escaped, do you think that was luck or quick thinking? Or maybe a combination of both. And I will see you guys later for chapter 9. Bye! They were nearing the heart of Lennox and the bakery she'd sat in front of 2 days ago. That didn't make sense.
I'm here, kitty. See, Ron? He's just a cute little kitty. Aww.
Wait. Who's talking, Ronan or Ron? She can't turn into a cat, Ronan. Ronan thinks she turned into a cat. And Ronan says that. What? Hang on. Goodness, I can't talk. Dang it, I can't talk. She looked over, and his expression was one she could... my goodness. And while she knew that Mavik could never go down... Oh my goodness. Blessing, she'd begin... I need my hands. I need my hands, Mavik said suddenly. How does Mavik talk? I need my hands. I'm Mavik. This is how I talk. This is how Mavik talks. No. Why is the bars coming up? Oh my gosh. I forgot to show you guys. I'm wearing my Camp Half-Blood t-shirt. Percy Jackson. Represent. My class would appreciate that.